very people who were closest to them. That's what we're here to talk about. I have been an attorney for about 23 years now. I know I must look like a kid, or, you know, maybe I'm delusional. But yeah, I've been practicing for a long time. I have spoken here about inheritance before many years ago. Most of my practice has been in the Islamic rules of inheritance, estate planning, asset protection, tax planning, anything that has to do with the transfer of wealth from one generation to another. I am a partner at the law firm of Bohm Wildish in Costa Mesa, but for a long time I had my own individual practice. It's relatively recent that I moved to a firm where I had the asset protection and estate planning group. And I have lots of clients who are Muslim, lots of clients that are not Muslim. And I'm the former chair of the Orange County Bar Association Trust and Estate Section. I am a board certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law. And I have written a book, or co-wrote the book, about Islamic estate planning. It's called Estate Planning for the Muslim Client. That's been published by the American Bar Association. It was published in 2019. It's a practice guide on estate planning with lawyers as the principal audience. So that's about me. That's about what we're going to be talking about today. Throughout this entire conversation, if one of you can come over and get this sign-up sheet, there's one for the sisters as well. I'll provide some additional information. I have several articles on Islamic estate planning that I can provide. If you want it, yeah, they can just you can just give your name and your email. And if you want to, if you don't want to, obviously don't sign up. Don't sign up for the information. But if you do, then that's fine. Now, for those of you who might be on live streaming, or you just you just rather go to it directly, I have a website called IslamicInheritance.com. IslamicInheritance.com. All of my articles are there. You can sign up for the email newsletter over there, and you'll get a lot of information on Islamic estate planning. Okay, so let me start this with a story. So there was, and this is a story that you've probably heard before. It's probably a story that you've heard before, even if you are a small child. But I'll tell you the story anyway. So there was this man and woman, and they got married. They were happily married, they were doing great, and they had a young child. This child was a daughter. And they were getting along really, really fine until something tragic happened. And that was that this mother of this child, she passed away. She passed away, and this made everybody sad. This made the daughter sad, and this made the husband sad as well. Now, the one thing that this man does, this now widower, what he does is probably going to be somewhat predictable. He marries again. So he marries another woman. And he marries this woman who has children, 2 daughters, about the same age as his own daughter. And everything is going just fine until another tragedy happens. And that is that this little girl's father, the man who lost his wife earlier, he himself passes away. Now, this young girl is now an orphan twice over, has lost both of her parents. She is now forced to become a servant in her own home, and the wealth of her parents, her birthright, has been weaponized against her. And this story, anybody know the name of the story? Yes, you know the name of the story. What story is this? What's it called? Okay, so it's actually called Cinderella. Right. And the thing about Cinderella is that it doesn't necessarily, we all know about it from Disney, but it obviously doesn't come from Disney, and Disney might actually credit the Grimm brothers, but it doesn't really come from the Grimm brothers either. What scholars have actually found about this particular story is that there is a version of this story in every single language, in every single culture, in every single time period in history where there is recorded words written down. This story exists throughout human history, and the notion that orphans tend to be oppressed by their own wealth is actually really, really common, right? Where do I go from there? Well, what do we know about Islamic history and the seerah and about orphans, right? We have this ayah of the Quran, right, about people who take from orphans, right? People who take unjustly from orphans will have nothing but fire in their belly. And then after that ayah comes, that's in the Quran, that's Surah Nisa, that's verse 10. Verse 11 then starts with what? Yusikumullahu fi awladikum, concerning the inheritance of your children. Now what comes after that is one of the more detailed rules that you'll actually see in the Quran or regarding inheritance just about anywhere else for any other religion or any other system. It is an incredibly sophisticated system of inheritance that has endured in Islam for a long, long time, right? What I found when I started this practice, and I got into this from a different field of law, is that this area of law, or this area of inheritance, of what is inheritance in Islam, has mostly fallen out of all knowledge in the Muslim community. Meaning that you can be born in this country, you can go to Jummah every single Friday, and you can die here and never once hear a khutbah about the Islamic rules of inheritance. Even though it's fard, it's mandatory. Why is it mandatory? Why is it mandatory? I need a volunteer. Can I ask a question? What's your name, brother? Mahmoud. Brother Mahmoud. I'm a Muslim. You just have to take my word for it. Say, as a Muslim, I get some legal fees. Can I go to Vegas and gamble them on blackjack? Is that okay? Why not? Okay, so gambling is not permissible, and thus I can't do that, right? What if I have a couple of $100,000 and I want to just keep it? I want it in my bank account, and I would just want to hold on to it, and I don't want to give any of it in zakah. Am I allowed to do that? Why not? Excellent, excellent answers, brother. So, but isn't it my money? I mean, it's my money. I can do whatever I want with my money, right? The poor have right on this money. More than that, is it really my money? It's not my money, right? Because lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard, right? Everything in the heavens and the earth and all that it contains belongs to who? Right, and whatever it is that we have, it's entrusted to us. It's entrusted to us, and we can make good decisions or we can make bad decisions, and there are certain things that we really just can't do if we accept that we are being obedient to Allah, right? And we need to worship. We use our money we use our money to worship as well, right? We use whatever wealth it is that we have, it all belongs to Allah, and we accept that as Muslims. And then when we pass away, one of the other things that happens is that we don't get to decide who gets what. Inheritance is too important of an issue for it to be left to human beings. deciding on their own what to do, right? Did Cinderella's father hate Cinderella? Probably not, right? I mean, it's a fictional story, but we know a lot of stories like it. Did the mom hate Cinderella? Probably not. But who's the real villain in Cinderella? It's not the wicked stepmother. It's not the wicked stepsisters. They are not the villains. The villain is the parents, the birth parents, the birth mother, the birth father, who left this mess for her, right? That's what happened here. And so we need to make sure that we are, when we're doing this, that we're not ever losing sight of why it is that we're doing it. Because we want to make sure and do right by the people that we love and the people that we care about. Now, what are these rules? Now, they're fairly simple. You're going to own something. You're going to have some stuff. What is that stuff? Here's the thing that makes it a little bit complicated for a lot of people. A lot of people, especially married people, don't know what they own. They just don't know what they have. The reason for that is that a lot of individuals own their property as joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Has anybody ever heard of joint tenancy with right of survivorship? You have. What is joint tenancy with right of survivorship, brother? Automatically, the other spouse gets everything. So, you own something, you own a house. Big asset, right? You own a house and you own it joint tenancy with right of survivorship, and you own it with your wife. Husband and wife own it together, right? So then what happens? If the wife passes away, what happens to the house? Husband takes it. Exactly, the husband takes it. Now, the husband gets remarried, like in Cinderella, right? What happens next? Yeah, of course. Is the husband going to marry a woman that is older than him? Possible. Is it likely? Probably not. This is his shot to marry young, right? He's probably going to marry somebody young. If he can, probably somebody very young, right? And his goal would be to outlive not outlive his wife, because he figures he's going to leave everything to his wife, right? Now, even if he doesn't want to, his wife, the new wife, might not let him. I actually gave one of these presentations years ago at one of these at a masjid, and somebody actually wrote me this wonderful little letter saying that, I heard what you said about the younger wife, and I'm in that situation. I'm really old, my wife is young, and I know my kids aren't going to get anything, and if I want to change that, then my wife will leave me, and I don't want my wife to leave me, right? What am I supposed to do? Well, there's going to be stuff that you're going to need to do, but he's not willing to do it, and that he's accepting the cost that he doesn't want to have his wife leave him, and that's a real thing, right? Now, his wife from before could have assured that this wouldn't have happened. She didn't, so it's kind of her fault, kind of not. In any event, it's kind of a mess. Now, one of the things that we do know is that throughout all of history, all of recorded history, that exact same story has played out over and over and over again. And if you're living and breathing in this world, you've got to be wise to that being the way the world works. We actually have this adage in estate planning. It's I think it came from a poet, but estate planners use it a lot. It's women mourn, men replace. Men will typically want to get remarried within a year to 18 months after their spouse passes away. And I've seen it in my practice over and over and over again. That's just what happens. Now let's go into these rules of inheritance. You need to actually divide up what is the husband's property, what is the wife's property. You need to know what that is. This business of joint tenancy with right of survivorship, it's just not going to fly, because you're not going to be able to assign what your rights are. You are a human being with property, if you don't know that you have that property, you have something. A man has something, a woman has something, right? Whatever the woman's is, she needs to be able to secure it. Why? She needs to secure it for her own progeny, right? What's going to happen? You're planning for a world where you do not exist, and the circumstances of the people that you leave behind, you have absolutely no idea. You don't know what the world is going to be like when you are no longer here, right? You might pass away. Your husband might get remarried. He might get married 3 more times. He might have 15 more children, right? There could be all sorts of twists and turns that might happen going on for the next several decades, and you won't know about any of this stuff. What you need to do is whatever children you have now, whatever parents you have now, whatever rights holders you have right now, you need to be able to secure their rights. That is essential, and it is independent of whatever your husband wants or whatever your wife wants. That is an obligation that exists for both of you individually and together, and for everybody else. That's it's fundamental. It's a fundamental right for your children. And if you don't do that, then you are doing an injustice. And you might not even know the nature of the injustice that you're doing. All of your money might be going to some other woman or some other woman's husband or something like that. There could be all sorts of weird stuff that might happen. It might not happen, but your children are not likely to get inheritance from you unless, or they could potentially, but there is a chance that they won't get anything. That could very easily occur. So how do we do it? Well, that gets us into these the shares of inheritance. After you've decided how it is, you can own your property either separately, so there's separate property. How many of you are familiar with community property? One person is familiar with community property. 2 people. Anybody want to tell me what community property is? 50-50. Okay, very good. So 50-50. So under California law, and this is by default, right? So we have this, everybody knows this used to be Mexico? Everyone knows that? Yeah. So there's this treaty with Mexico called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? And so one of the reasons why we have community property is because this used to be Mexico. And the community property does not exist in most of the United States. That's something that exists in California and about 8 other states. But community property is this notion that everything that you earn through your skill, labor, and effort while you are part of a community is community property. So we were talking about this earlier as well, brother. So, what happens is that we have this notion in the United States, and this is a cultural notion, specifically in places like California, we have this notion of a partnership theory of marriage. And this is the idea that a marriage is not just a social and family partnership, but it is also an economic partnership. So you're in this together, you are an engineer. You go and earn a salary doing really cool engineering stuff, and you come and bring it back home and you put it in your bank account. Now 50% of it belongs to you, 50% of it belongs to your wife, and vice versa. Whatever it is that your wife earns also goes to the husband, and that's 50-50, right? That's how you do it. Now, is that Islam? Not necessarily, right? Is that against Islam? Again, not necessarily. Islam does not actually govern how you and your wife or you and your husband organize your financial affairs. So if you want to have your assets 50-50, you can. If you don't want it that way, and there are couples that are like that. Look, you have your stuff, I have my stuff. I don't even want to know what's going on with your finances, and you don't get to know what's in mine, and it's all separate. We're going to raise the kids and all of that stuff, and I'll pay maybe the husband will be like, I'll pay the bills, and you do your thing, whatever it is. You want to make your money, you get your money from your family business or whatever it is, you can do that, and it has nothing to do with me. Plenty of couples do that. That's perfectly fine. Whatever arrangement it is that you have with your husband, whatever arrangement you have with your wife is perfectly fine with me if it's fine with you, right? So there isn't an actual prescription when it comes to that stuff. What there is a prescription for is what happens to it after you have passed away. Under those circumstances, your spouse, assuming your spouse is Muslim, and in fact, assuming all of these people that I'm going to mention are Muslim, assuming that, then your spouse, if it is your husband, gets either half or a quarter, depending on whether or not there are children. If there are children, you get less. The husband gets less. Same thing with the wife, except the percentages are different or the fractions are different. It's either a quarter or an eighth, depending on whether or not there are children. Now, a wife is a special type of relationship in in Islam. It's a unique family relationship that doesn't really exist elsewhere, right? So, for example, can you make a contract? Can you make a contract with your daughter and say that if you're not my daughter anymore, then I'm going to give you $100,000, right? No, that's not a thing. That's not a thing with your daughter. It's not a thing with your son. That's actually pretty ridiculous. But you can do that with your wife, right? That's called mahar muakhara, right? So you can make a deal and say that, upon the ending of this marriage, be it by death or divorce, you get X amount. Now that is different, right? And that's not something that's available elsewhere. And of course, whatever property it is that the surviving spouse already has is theirs, right? And so if there is an agreement between a husband and a wife that everything is 50-50, 50% belongs to the husband, 50% belongs to the wife, then that 50% belongs to the wife, not because she inherited that 50%, but that 50% belongs to her regardless of whether her husband is dead or alive. That is her stuff. And once you've already assumed that it's her stuff, then of course the husband gets inheritance from that. If then there are also the children that get inheritance, and the parents. Parents generally get, they generally get about a sixth for the father, sixth for the mother. There are circumstances where these numbers might all change, but a sixth, so the father and mother get the same share. And does anybody know how the son and daughter get inheritance? What's the fraction for sons and daughters? Anybody know that? So the answer was 50% for the son, 25% for the daughter. Not exactly. So basically what happens is it's a 2-to-1. So the son gets twice the share of the daughter. However it is that breaks down, because sometimes people only have like one son and one daughter. Sometimes they have like one daughter and 5 sons. There could be any number of ways that breaks down. But the daughter does get less. One of the things that I've found with inheritance, most of the time with my clients, they understand that. That's the first thing that people actually know. If they know anything about the Islamic rules of inheritance, they typically know that thing, right? And they've already made their peace with that before they come in. They understand one of the important things about the way the economic system works within families in Islam. Say, for example, there is a sister and a brother. The sister is 50 years old, but she is destitute. She is really, really suffering financially. She has a brother who is 40 years old. The brother he's a very wealthy businessman. He's doing great. He doesn't get along with his sister, and he's not supporting her. Can the sister go to a court and tell the judge, hey, Mr. Judge, my brother, he has all this money and he's not supporting me. Make him support me. How do you think that'll go? Okay, the answer was, in Islam, yes. In America, no. In America, that would be an utterly ridiculous request. It doesn't make any sense at all. But in Islam, it actually makes perfect sense, in the notion that a judge would scold the brother and say, what are you doing, right? This doesn't make any sense. You go take care of your sister. Of course, a judge should do that. Any Muslim should do that. Anybody that he sees any elder in the community, any sheikh, anybody would tell the guy, you're wrong. You shouldn't be doing that, right? That is an obligation that you have, to take care of people in your family, take care of women in your family. That's what you should be doing. And so there is this, I'm not saying that's the reason why the shares are different, but it's not the same thing. Money for a man is different than money for a woman, because money for a man comes with obligations. Women do not have those obligations. Now, if the shoe was on the other foot, will the sister have an obligation to take care of the brother? She doesn't have that same obligation. She might, because she's nice, but she doesn't have to, right? And so that's a major difference between the way wealth works. And so one of the ways I might describe that to some people is that, say, you have two identical homes, and they're right next to each other. One of the homes has, is basically free and clear. The other one has a right of way given to like a power company or drilling operations, or there's a right of way to go to the beach or something like that. They're not the same thing, right? If you have rights that are given to other people on one piece of property and no rights given on others, then they're not exactly the same thing. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily matter to some people, and it should. I mean, it's just something that bears worth mentioning for those who do wonder about that particular issue. It's something that for those people who are not necessarily comfortable with the Islamic rules of inheritance, it bothers them. Now, one thing that they might say is that, okay, well, that sounds really nice for some other era or some other period in history where the Islamic rules, or there's Islamic courts and there's an Islamic system. Okay, fine, that's one thing. But hey, we're in America, right? So how does that apply? Well, that goes to the rules that we could actually create in the documents that we do. And so that brings us to the types of documents that we create. One of them is called a living trust. Now, everything that we do here, what do we call it? A living trust. We call it a will, power of attorney. Anything that an attorney would do is going to be a bunch of pieces of paper with stuff written on it. In and of itself, it actually means nothing. What's important is what's inside it and how it accomplishes the goals that you wish to accomplish. So sometimes, and this is not something that we would always do for people, but sometimes we might have rules with respect to how inheritance is treated and who the permissible beneficiaries are. We might actually mandate that there be a contract where the spouse, not the spouse, I'm sorry, where the brother, for example, will sign a document that states that, Jazakallah khair, that's great, alhamdulillah. So that there might be a contract where he agrees to take care of his sister. That might be something that we might mandate happen, which he has to do anyway. So we might actually incorporate that into this type of an arrangement. Now, what is a living trust? It's a contract. It's an agreement between three people. There are three people in this arrangement. The first one is a grantor. So you create an agreement, and you're the grantor. You take your house, you take your bank account, whatever it is, you take your business, all of your stuff goes into this trust. And then you take this trust and you give it to a trustee. A trustee is the person who manages this trust. So that's the second person. The trustee manages this trust for the benefit of the third person in this arrangement, and that is the beneficiary. And the beneficiary is the whole reason this arrangement exists in the first place. Now, while you're alive and while you're healthy, under most circumstances, we use trust for lots of different purposes, but this is sort of like the baseline. I'm a responsible adult and I just want to make sure and take care of inheritance properly. So this is just the baseline of what you might be doing. But you would create this trust, you would be the grantor, you would be the trustee, and you would be the beneficiary. You'd be all of these things. But then you're going to assign roles to other people. If you can't manage your affairs anymore, then either because of death or incapacity, then you're giving this responsibility to somebody else. That's your successor trustee. That person, in the event that you pass away, is going to gather your estate, pay off any debts, and then distribute it to your heirs. Now, your heirs are the people who are entitled to inheritance from you. But then there's this other group or person or institution that you might also give to, and that is referred to as the wasiyah. The wasiyah is your permissible ability to give up to 1/3 for a beneficial purpose. So you can give a wasiyah to the masjid, right? Absolutely. You can give it to this masjid. You could give your wasiyah to family members who are not otherwise entitled to inheritance under the Islamic rules of inheritance. And, for just about anything except the people who are already entitled to inheritance. What does that mean? You can't give the wasiyah to your daughter, to your son, to your spouse. Those are your parents. You can't give a wasiyah to them. But you can give a wasiyah to a wide range of other people. One of the more common ways that we often use wasiyah is for non-Muslim family members. Like I mentioned before, inheritance, these shares assume that these people are Muslim. Muslims are entitled to inheritance, non-Muslims are not, but a lot of people, not necessarily me, but a lot of people have family members that are not Muslim. They might have, but they might want to give. A lot of people are converts, or they have families. They have families with they have complicated family relationships, or what have you, and they need to give something to people who are not entitled to inheritance from them. That's the wasiyah. The other way that we sometimes use wasiyah is adopted children. Adopted children are not your children in Islam. They're not your children for purposes of the Islamic rules of inheritance. And this is very critical for a lot of, this is how a lot of times in the United States, in California, under the law, adopted children are children. This is a legal fiction that we've adopted in our system, but we need to actually make sure and reject that, because it's not true. But a lot of times people will want to give something to their adopted child, and they can do so by utilizing the wasiyah. And so that's how the living trust works. By the way, how's this? I've been talking and talking and talking. It's a relatively small group. How's this going? Everything going okay? Any questions so far? Anything? Yes? Sisters and brothers may come under the wasiyah, or they may not, depending on whether or not they have rights to inheritance from you. So in certain instances, so like say for example, you have a son and two daughters and a father and a mother, right? Then what'll happen is that your father and your mother and your son and your daughters and your spouse, they're all going to get inheritance from you. Your siblings get nothing. Now, given that your siblings get nothing, you could give a wasiyah to them under those circumstances. So it's possible, depending on what your family tree looks like and how the Islamic rules of inheritance applies to that family tree. So that's a really good question. There was another one over here somewhere? Yes. So a non-Muslim does not inherit from a Muslim. Wasiyah is not inheritance. So 1/3 is the maximum. 1/3 is it's not the minimum, it's the maximum. So you can give less than 1/3, or you can give nothing at all. So the wasiyah is your option, right? So yeah, your non-Muslims cannot be, they cannot be your waratha, right? They can't be your heirs, but you can give them wasiyah. That's okay, right? So anything else before I continue on? So one of the things about wasiyah is that is often confused with the term will, or last will and testament. Now those are very different things. Now what we will typically do with a will is that we will name guardians for minor children in a will, and a will only covers, in California, probate assets. What's a probate asset? A probate asset is when you need a dead person's signature to transfer property from one person to another. That's what a probate asset is. So say, for example, you have a house in your own name, and then you die. Well, who are you going to sell it to and how? Well, you can't sell it to anybody because you're dead. Who's going to sign for you? Well, nobody, because you're dead. And what do? Well, you have to go to a court, and you have to go through a court process, and that's fairly expensive, and it takes a long time. That's why we tend to do things based on a living trust in California. And so we want to avoid probate if at all possible. But sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes people get their house outside of a living trust for whatever reason, or they get a bank account, or they get some sort of an account that wasn't part of their trust, and then it became big, and then they have to do a probate. And so sometimes that's necessary. The other big thing is, of course, guardians for minor children. So it's a backstop. The other thing that we typically plan for is incapacity. Incapacity is not an inheritance issue, but it's just something that does come up quite frequently. So there are a lot of people that are walking. Is there something going on? Is everything okay with the mic? Okay, good. So there's a lot of people out there that are walking, talking, telling jokes. They might seem completely normal, but if they got an email from Nigeria or something asking for their bank account number, they might give it, and they might not have done it a year before, right? Otherwise, they're completely fine. They might be wise. They might be people that you go to for advice, right? But people and families know that this is what's going on, and they need to do something about it. Otherwise, the family might become very poor very fast. And how do you handle that with delicacy? Because if you go to somebody and you say, well, you go to an elder in your family, you go to your father, and you tell your father, look, Dad, I think you lost all your marbles here or something. Well, what is he going to say? He's probably going to be very offended, right? He might be very offended. How do you deal with that? Well, one of the ways we do deal with it is, well, we don't want to go to court, because that would be really, really bad. You go to court, you get something called a conservatorship. Has anybody ever heard of a conservatorship? You've heard of a conservatorship? Okay, so a conservatorship is a proceeding, it's a protective proceeding to protect somebody from themselves. Exactly. So it's a protective proceeding to protect somebody against their own really bad decision making, and to substitute somebody else's decision making for their own. What we want to do is, for our elders, for everybody actually, we want to be able to protect their privacy and protect their dignity. And we typically do that through a trust and a power of attorney. Now, you don't want to give away your autonomy or liberty just like that, right? And you might trust your wife, you might trust your husband, but no matter how much you implicitly trust or love or respect your husband or your wife, you don't want to give that one person, the unilateral authority to take away all of your money and declare you crazy, right? You don't want one person doing that. So typically we create a shura. We just have a group of people that you love, trust, respect. This group of people decides that if they decide that you can't make decisions for yourself, this would be the people that you love the most in the world, and they get together and they say, look, this is what's been happening. We all agree that your husband or your brother or whoever it is should start managing your affairs. You would be more likely to accept that, right? Instead of going over to that person and confronting him, you wrote a $10,000 check to who? Or you did what? Or how did all this money exit your bank account? You're not, instead of confronting that person and making that person defensive, you do this together as a shura within the family and deal with it in the best possible way that is tailored for that particular individual and that particular individual's sensibilities for that type of situation. So let's talk a little bit about a few other things. How am I doing in time? I'm okay? Okay, good. So go on. Question is, can you designate a guardian from outside of the state of California? The answer is yes. So we do this very frequently. I normally will, on guardianship for minor children, I have a lot of clients who are not from the United States, like they might even be here relatively recently, and they don't have siblings or parents, or the people that are closest to them, at least on a family level, might not be in the state or might not be in the country at all. They might be an ocean away, right? And so it's possible to name guardians overseas. What I frequently recommend is also naming people locally as well, because sometimes it takes a while to get here. Sometimes we have pandemics or wars or embassies blow up or weird things happen, right? And it might take a while for them to come in and come to court and get that and take that responsibility. So you might want to name somebody on a temporary basis here and then go overseas for that purpose. You can name people overseas as long as they can come here, and as long as the judge believes that it's in the best interest of the child. There shouldn't be a problem with respect to that. And so if that means the child goes to another state or even to another country, that shouldn't be a problem. Okay? Let's keep going on. As far as yes, brother. Well, it depends on what the power of attorney says. Yeah, but yeah, power of attorney can last quite a while. So the question was, how long does the power of attorney last? Does it expire? Power of attorney, sometimes there are provisions within powers of attorney that do expire. So for example, tax powers might have an expiration date, but oftentimes powers of attorney can be revoked. So if somebody decides I don't want that power of attorney anymore, then they can revoke that power of attorney. That's a possibility. Oh. Okay, that's fine. We'll keep going. If there's I'll just keep going. If you guys want to, I don't mind with this group. If you guys want to just ask me questions, it's fine. It's fine. I'll get through whatever I need to get through, and if I don't, we can, then I guess that's everyone's loss. That's okay. So, I do. I'll give it to you. I'll put some out. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm sorry? Nothing? Okay, let's keep going. So, so the family home. This is actually like a really crucial thing that we don't necessarily think about too much. Most of the time, here in California, the biggest asset is usually the home, right? It's usually the residential real estate that's worth more than a lot of other things that family members have. Sometimes it's not a problem. You might have businesses or you might have brokerage accounts that are more valuable than the family home. But most people, especially if most people, that's probably not the case. The home is going to be your biggest investment. So what happens then? You own it together. Husband owns 50%, wife owns 50%, maybe, right? You can make whatever arrangement you want with respect to that. Then what happens? One spouse passes away, and you've got this really big asset, and you've got to actually think about, well, what's going to happen? Where's the surviving spouse going to live, right? Because what needs to happen? The house has to be sold, 50% or whatever percentage it is that is owned by the surviving spouse goes to the surviving spouse, and then the rest goes to the children, parents, whatever the case may be, right? And so one of the things that we might do with respect to the house is allow for some level of flexibility with respect to the home. One thing that people might do is that they might own the home with their children. So they get a deed to the home and split the deed, this percent for the widowed wife, this percent for the children who are orphans. So everybody gets a little percentage of the house. That's possible. One of the problems in doing an arrangement like this is that some children tend to get older. That's just the way it works. They get older and they might have drama in their lives. What happens? You become a grown-up, you get into a bad relationship, you get married, you get divorced, you get into a business deal, and business deal goes bad, you get sued, stuff happens. Then what happens? As you get old and you want to live the rest of your life out in dignity in your own home, and you don't want to be worried about getting kicked out of your home when you're 70 or something like that, right? You don't want that, and you don't want your kids' drama to end up being your drama. And so what we might have to do under those circumstances is not have the home be owned by the kids. Instead, what we do is we create a separate type of a trust arrangement. And that trust arrangement owns equity in the home, but not the home itself. And one of the reasons for that is, you don't want your property taxes to go up either, right? You want the same property taxes. So what we do is we create a separate type of a trust arrangement for the children so that they are not deprived of their right to inheritance. At the same time, their ex-spouse, their ex-business partner, somebody that they crashed a car into, whatever the case may be, those people can't come knocking on your door and saying, hey, I want this house because I'm owed this money. You want to be able to protect yourself, your children, from these types of things and happening going forward, right? Because there's only so much in terms of assets, and if it is eviscerated by drama that happens later in life, you'd rather avoid that if you can. One of the other things that I mentioned, though, is, well, what happens after one spouse passes away? What does the surviving spouse often do, especially if the surviving spouse is male? What's he going to do very, very quickly? Yes, he's going to get remarried probably soon. And so what are you going to do under those circumstances? Well, you need to you're managing the money of orphans, you're managing the money of other people, your children. You want to be able to protect it. I once had this situation. I'm a little bit pressed for time. I'll try to make this as fast as possible with respect to the story. But I got a call from an attorney once after I did a responsive pleading. This was a case that involved a prenuptial agreement, and I did a responsive pleading, and he said, you know what, I agree with you. We're going to drop the case. And I was like, there's just no way that I'm that good. Something's up. But what happened here was that this guy was he was a very, very wealthy man, industrialist, inventor, had private planes, all that stuff. And then he lost his wife after many years. So he lost his wife, and he was really sad. And then he got this phone call, and it was a wrong number phone call. And he just kept on talking to this person. And naturally, he married her. He stayed married to her for 20 years, then passed away. What we had discovered was that at the time she had made this wrong number phone call, she was already a convicted felon. She had already stolen a lot of money from a bunch of other people, and throughout the next 20 years, she had systematically stolen millions of dollars, not just from this guy, but from this guy's wife's trust. So she had been stealing a ton of money throughout that time. But she wanted more, which is why she filed that lawsuit. So anyway, one of the big pieces of estate planning advice I give, I can say get a living trust, get a good lawyer. I can say all these things. Those are important. They're not the most important thing. The most important thing is just marry wisely. Marry wisely is what I would say. And I don't have any advice on how to do that, but that's how you would do it. Okay. Yes. The question is, can you have multiple trusts? The answer is yes. Yes, I have lots of clients with multiple trusts, and they serve a wide range of purposes that are probably, some of them are beyond the scope, but we have charitable trust, special needs trust, asset protection trust, a variety of trusts that we do for estate tax purposes. There are trusts done for gifting purposes. There's just a lot of different types of trusts that we do. It's like it's a whole field, and there's a lot of them. Yes. The question is, do you put your house in the same trust as your intellectual property and other things? Maybe, maybe not. It just depends on the person, depends on their circumstances, depends on their goals. If they're doing some tax planning or if they're doing some asset protection, Yeah, I have people who have several trusts. I might have people that have as many as 4 or 5 trusts. They might be doing a charitable remainder trust. We do a lot of asset protection. We have trusts that are set up in the Cook Islands. We have trusts set up in Nevada. We have, so there's just a bunch of stuff that we might do for people, depending on their circumstances. Yes, brother. Yeah, so we do have a few minutes left, I think, a little bit. So, but as far as just what I charge, like me personally, it varies widely. Estate planning is an entire field of law, and there is just a lot of different things that I do for clients. It's generally flat fee. Sometimes I charge for certain things hourly if I don't know what to do as a flat fee, but if I can do a flat fee, it'll be a flat fee. It starts at $3,000, but married couples will be more, like $4,000. But it could be quite a bit more depending on the design, depending on what it is that they want to do. So it's all over the map. Good. It's really cheap. You think I should raise it? Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes, the question is if you have a trust that wasn't done Islamically 10 years ago, should you just change it? Yes, of course, it's far, absolutely. To do something, to make sure that inheritance is done correctly is... So the question is, do you add to it or what have you? Remember, we're talking about pieces of paper with stuff written on it, right? So it's, but it is like you keep the name of your trust. So if you did any asset transfers, the asset transfers stay the same. So you don't have to redo the asset for your, asset transfer for your house or bank accounts or anything like that. But the actual documents are going to change. They'll change completely. So, but it's just the documents that'll change, not the asset transfer part. There's another question here. Can you put a corporation for all your assets? Yeah, so a corporation doesn't actually deal with what happens after you pass away. It's still a probate asset, and it's going to be subject to probate. So say, for example, you put all of your assets in a corporation, and that's how you deal with it, and then what will happen is that it's going to be subject to the laws of intestacy. Intestacy basically means that if you don't have a will, no problem, the government will give you one. And so the government will decide how your assets are going to be distributed, and it's not going to be done based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, and it's also going to be subject to probate, which is roughly, just a rule of thumb, about 5% of the gross value of your estate. So the cost is actually very, very expensive to go through a probate. It takes quite a long time, and there doesn't appear, from my vantage point, there really isn't any advantage to that. Well, you can, like right now, you can do that now. After death? Well, if you're doing it after death, then you're doing something like a will or a trust. Right. So you can't really do that unless you're creating some sort of an arrangement for that. A corporation typically doesn't do that. A corporation is a business organization, and the purpose behind it is to organize a business. It's not the same as doing something that is as avoiding probate. In fact, it might actually cause a probate. So a corporation is a completely different type of a vehicle. Normally in California, corporations, are as going concerns for things like, if you want to raise money or stuff like that, then it's often beneficial, but it usually is not great for a wide range of purposes. So, so leave it at that. Yes, brother.
Basically, the inheritance and the wasiya are a set standard in Islam. The wasiya is a must, or can someone just distribute all of the inheritance?
Okay, so two different concepts here. One is the inheritance, which is known as the fara'id, right? So the fara'id is different from the wasiya. The fara'id is mandatory, and then the wasiya is discretionary. So the wasiya has to be, the wasiya does not need to be distributed. It doesn't need to exist at all. So you don't have to have a wasiya, but what will happen is that if you say for example, you give a third of your assets as the wasiya, say if you give 1/3 to the masjid as your wasiya, the other 2/3 must be distributed per the fara'id, and you don't get to decide what that is, right? Then, okay, so the question is, what if you don't have a wasiya? Then the fara'id part becomes bigger. So if you don't have a wasiya at all, then 100% of your estate is going to be distributed pursuant to the fara'id. Yes?
So what is defined as your estate though? So if your surviving spouse, will the surviving spouse take 50% and then 50% is distributed to everybody? Or is it just everything? Like for example, you said, the example I gave you before, say you and your spouse have a joint account with X amount of money.
Okay, so the question is, well, what is your estate? And so that goes back to what we talked about earlier in the conversation, is that it's important for you to know what that is, right? And a lot of people don't know, and the main reason they don't know is because they don't know if they're going to die before their spouse, right? Because joint tenancy with right of survivorship, it's like whoever dies second wins, right? And so you don't know who that's going to be, and so you don't know what your estate is. So you need to be able to say, you have an agreement or an understanding that the account, if you want to do 50-50, that's fine with me. You want to say that this is my wife's account and I have nothing to do with it, that's fine too. Your wife needs to know that this is her account and you have no right to it, or she should know that it's 50-50 and you can just you can just take whatever you want, right? So there has to be some sort of an understanding with respect to each of your assets, right? So if it's real estate can be either community property, it can be separate property, or it could be divided up in percentages. If it's a business asset, like say for example a corporation or an LLC, you're going to own a portion of it yourself individually. You might own all of it, but it might be your individual asset, or it might be a community asset, or it might not be yours at all. It might just belong to your wife, right? And you need to actually determine that. One of the more important things that you're going to be doing with a conversation like this today is that if you don't know how your assets are divided, and you kind of have it in a muddle with your wife where, it's just ours and whatever, remember, you have an expiration date. You are, and there are people who have rights over you after you pass away. And are you keeping faith with that? And you can't be keeping faith with that if you don't know if you're going to die before your wife or not, or if you're going to die before your husband or not. You need to actually separate that out. And regardless of whether you die before your wife, if you die before your husband, if you die after your husband, it shouldn't matter. You know what it is that you have, and therefore, based on that, these are the people who receive inheritance from me, right? And you should know who your heirs are. You should know, if you have daughters and you don't have a son, maybe you should know whether it's your siblings who inherit from you, because they might, right? So you should know who all of these people are that inherit from you. So you need to calculate out the shares of inheritance for yourself and make sure that they're the ones that are actually receiving this inheritance.
I guess the wasiya can be translated as donation. That way it can be clear.
So the comment was the wasiya should be maybe say donation. I don't know. We sometimes use the term bequest, right? So it would be a term that you make a decision. It's your discretionary ability to give, because you can decide to some extent who gets what from your estate. You don't get to decide all of it. I was once in court years ago, many years ago, and I was just waiting in line for the hearing to come up, for my hearing to come up, and then there was this one case that was being heard. It was like 7 or 8 lawyers on this one case, and they were arguing for like 15 minutes about whether or not they should continue the case for another week over some paperwork or some nonsense like that. But one of the things that occurred to me, there were a couple of things. One, this case at the time, this is a family, they're billionaires in the Muslim community. It was worth the case was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the family I actually knew. I went to this person's janaza. I've been to his home many times, and I was seeing this family completely disintegrate. Now, this was one of these families. They had this nice big home, and then all of the children had homes right around them, and they always used to meet regularly. They were a really tight, close-knit family. And then what happened was that this person passed away, and everybody started suing everybody else. And at that time, I had a few clients in the lower rungs of that family. And I just asked, I asked one of them, what was going on here? What happened? And, he had told me at that time, they had spent over $20 million in attorney's fees so far. I mean, and he was like, imagine what good could have happened in the Muslim community for $20 million. This particular family is very generous in the Muslim community, by the way. What was that? Oh, it was definitely not me. So, somebody in a really, really tall building somewhere in Century City, probably. I don't know. But anyway, he told me that, what happened was that they didn't follow the Islamic rules. They didn't follow Islam. If they had done that, none of this would have happened. Now, I don't know that for a fact, right? But one of the things that I know is that with inheritance, a lot of it is we're leaving it to our own vanity, right? That's the way this world works. Remember when we talked about, well, it's my money, right? It's my money, my money, my money. I can do with it as I please. But it's not. It's not. So to make sure that you are doing this correctly, I mean, you're doing this that was the subject of this. This is multi-generational trauma, right? What's going to happen? The money is not the problem. The money is not the big thing. The $20 million is nothing compared to the fact that there are going to be cousins that are going to be enemies with each other, that won't know each other, right? Adhan, okay. So we are done with this conversation after prayer. I know that there's some questions here, and if I'll be here for a few minutes afterwards. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Ahmed Shaikh. I hope everyone benefited from this. It's a very important topic. And the brother, are you going to be available for questions afterwards?
I'll be here.
The brother's going to be available afterwards for questions, so stick around if you want.